All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am so grateful to have a wonderful panel of guests here. My name is Dr. Marini Smith, and I am a professor of education and child development at West Los Angeles College. This session that you have signed up for is all about special education. The title of this session is Let's SPAR for Exceptional Children. And SPAR is kind of a play on words. It's both an acronym that stands for support, programs, advocacy, and resources. But when you think of sparring, you think of like a boxer kind of like preparing for their next match. And anyone who works in special education, particularly if you're a parent or an advocate, that is a pretty fitting metaphor because you're often kind of fighting for services, you're fighting for resources, you're fighting for rights, special education rights. So we're going to talk about all of that today. And so I'm really, really thankful that all of you have chosen our session for today. Once again, it's being recorded, so you'll be able to go back and revisit the session and review any of the information. Again, we have a packed session for you. We have amazing panelists here for you, and I'm so, so excited. This session is brought to you by the Teach Los Angeles Regional Collaborative. And a lot of the resources you'll be able to find on their website. Ms. Becca will put that in the chat so that you can view the recordings and other resources from this week's event. And also you can look at previous recordings from other sessions as well. And also, by the way, happy Teacher Appreciation Week. Let's give a shout out to all of the teachers, future teachers, current teachers, previous teachers, because teachers really are absolutely amazing. They're basically superheroes without cape. So thank you so much for joining us today. Okay, so here are some frequently asked questions. Will you receive a certificate for this session? Yes. So if you include, and I know some of you have already done that, so thank you. If you include your first and last name and email in the chat, a certificate will be sent. It will be a general certificate where you will be able to go ahead and input your information in there, but it will have the information from this session so that you can get credit. You can keep it for your records, for your portfolio. So yes, please go ahead, put your first, last name and email in the chat, and then you will receive a certificate within the next day or two. So just give me until Wednesday, you should have your certificates. Will a session recording be available? Yes, as I mentioned, you can check the teachlarc.org website after May 7th for the session recordings. So this is going to be the format for our session. So we're introducing the session. Now, each panelist is going to speak briefly about their connection to special education. Then we're going to start with some Q&A from some pre-submitted questions. And then we're going to open it up to you, our participants, and you will be able to ask questions. And then we'll wrap up with final thoughts from the panelists. So with regards to Zoom keeping, what we're going to do is when we open up the questions, the panelists will be able to respond. If you have a question for a panelist, if you can use the raising your hand feature, that will help, and then your name will go to the top of our list. I'll be able to see you and I'll be able to call on you in order to have you ask your question. If for whatever I don't see your hand, feel free to put your question in the chat and Bobby will help me monitor the chat, and then we'll be able to get to your questions that way. So keep in mind for your questions, so listen as the presenters give you their introduction and tell you a little bit about themselves. Hopefully their introduction will kind of give you a little bit more insights as to the type of questions that you might want to ask. Some of the questions that you ask might be directed to a specific panelist, so that's fine. You can call them by name. You might say, I have a question for Nadia, or I have a question for Jonathan, or for Lisa, or for Kelley. But you might also have a general question that anyone on the panel can answer, and that's fine too. So you might just say, I just have a question for any panelist, and then you can go ahead and pose your question. So just keep that in mind. Your questions can be specific to a certain panelist, or they can be general where anyone on the panel can respond. All right, are we ready? Okay, and if you notice, most of the panelists are identified. We have our Teach for OLA backgrounds, and so you'll be able to kind of see who the panelists are. So I'm going to call out the panelists in this order. So first we're going to hear from Noel, then Edward, then Kelley, then Noel, then Nadia, then Lisa, and then Jonathan. And they're going to tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we will open it up to our first question. All right, so thank you so much. Questions from the participants before we begin? All right, then let's go ahead and get started. Noelle, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everybody. My name is Noelle Scott, and I apologize for the dog that won't stop barking suddenly. So I started my journey with special education back in 2001-ish. I was actually recruited by New York City Teaching Fellows to enter into like a new teacher program in New York City. And I was selected because of my background in social work and I guess some of the classes that I took to be in a special education credentialing program. So I started working there, but my background before that has always been in correctional education. So working with people who are incarcerated, whether it's in a social work setting, or also I helped with programming for education. And so I started the New York City Teaching Fellows program, and then I started working at Rikers Island Correctional Facility. I worked there for 9 years as a special education teacher with students ages like 15 to 75. Of course, students under 22 were the ones receiving special education services. And so my heart and my life's work is kind of working with the underdog students who have been misrepresented or not really fought for in the system. And so I learned a lot there. I worked with youngsters, 15 and 16-year-olds, and also adult students who either still had their IEP or also students who had aged out their IEP but had significant barriers to education. From there, I moved back to Los Angeles, and I am currently and have been working for Five Keys Charter School. We are a school that operates in county jails in 10 counties in California, and I'm currently the director of special education. This work is really personal to me because I have oh my gosh, he's 7. He just turned 7, a 7-year-old son who is totally incredible. He was diagnosed while I was pregnant with Down syndrome. And then as he grew up, he was then also diagnosed with autism. He is incredible and beautiful and just a really smart kid. I think I have my connection with my son, but I also have kind of been really outspoken about the inequity in education based on a person's zip code. So my husband and I were located in South Los Angeles. And as my son began his journey into entering preschool and kindergarten, it became very clear that the educational settings that I was accustomed to in my growing up, in my zip code where I grew up, was extremely different. And so I really did fight back with the large district that I was in to kind of challenge them to show me a classroom that I thought was acceptable for my son and for his peers and kiddos in the city just like him, who have some barriers but want to thrive in their educational setting. And so I was able to partner with Speak Up Parents, which is an organization that's incredibly dear to me. And actually, one of Lisa, Mosko, is here to, I think, talk about that as well. But they gave me an opportunity to write about my experience and really highlight just the absolute inequity in our education system and how students of color and students in zip codes that have low socioeconomic status are really like glaringly different than the classrooms, what I say, like north of the 405, 101. Opportunities for inclusion for students with disabilities is not an option where we live. And so I am working really hard with Speak Up Parents and other organizations to really kind of put pressure on school districts to embrace inclusion, because students with exceptional need or disabilities or whatever you want to call them are extremely valuable to our community. And you're not going to be able to put like people in a box in society. And so starting in the classroom is so important to teach like our community and their peers and to embrace every single person for the beautiful human that they are. And so I will continue that fight. And so I also try to do that in my work as a director of special education and making sure that we're highlighting people's ability and making sure that they're included in everything that we do as a school and that we're always striving for inclusion. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome, Noel, thank you so much. As I told you, we have amazing panelists, and that's just the first person. I realize I mentioned your name twice when I set the lineup for all the people, so you're just going to introduce yourself once, Noel. Next, we're going to hear from Ed, then Kelley, then Nadia, then Lisa, then Jonathan. So Ed, you're up next.
Hold on. Are you hearing me now? Can you hear me?
Absolutely, perfectly.
Oh, wait. Now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, as you can see, I'm still in my classroom right now. I teach a self-contained classroom at Lynn Howe Elementary School in Culver City Unified. This is my 14th year, with Culver City Unified. Prior to this, for 13 years, I was the inclusion specialist. And I don't know, I'll just be honest with you, as part of my journey in special education, it's been this like 13 years I was the inclusion specialist. Then inclusion became, when I was doing it, no one really knew what the word was. No one seemed to mind. Oh, I guess, go do what you're doing. And then it became more, I guess this is one of the challenges when it becomes more like, okay, we're going to do this. Then I was told we can't justify your position anymore. And then a whole different group of people were brought in to do that. I was offered this classroom, which I love, which is third, fourth, fifth, more on the moderate to severe disabilities would be the label for the students. But I don't know, I just love being around the students. I love empowering students like this, like myself. I just love empowering anyone to recognize that they have a voice. It doesn't matter if they don't speak with any words or one word or an iPad, or they're really eloquent. Sometimes they're too eloquent for people. They speak their truth and that people don't want to hear, some of my students. But I do my best to empower my students to come from within and don't let anyone else turn them into their fears, to come back to certain principles that always work, which have always worked for me. And I use these principles to guide my instruction and also to guide my life. So I'm always learning from my students. Before this, I taught middle school, also SDC, special day class. That was I'm not even sure if that's the right acronym that they use anymore, but for middle school, for Orville Wright Middle School. I did that for 3.5 years. Before that, I taught at a non-public school in the Bay Area. That was for students that we had a zero expulsion policy. We took students that many of them had self-injurious behavior or some violent behaviors. I really learned a lot about principles, again, that work with anyone when I was working there. And before that, I worked for 3 years as a one-on-one in an ABA program with students with autism in their home program. And I was coming out, I got a general psych degree out of UC San Diego. I think I was drawn into this field for 2 reasons. One, because my own anxiety, I had to learn how to address my own anxiety, and I recognized how that affected my outcomes in learning. While I did well in school, it came to a point where the charade I couldn't go along. I had to basically find out who I was and start living from that place. And I believe that I don't care who you are, when you find out who you are and you live from that place, that doors open that would not necessarily happen. And that's why I love the message of inclusivity, because I believe there's a set of principles that that apply to anyone and everyone. And I write a column for the Culver City News called Tapping into Genius, which is basically inclusive principles through the lens of how I apply them at meetings, how I apply them with my students, how they teach me about them. And so, yeah, hopefully all that made sense. I also have in my mind an 8 a.m. triennial IEP that I have 45 minutes to complete with a lot of people before my students just start walking through the door. So I'm just like compartmentalizing a lot of different things right now, but that's kind of the game we play sometimes. So that's me.
Wow, thank you so much, Ed. And that's just a real kind of sneak peek when you mentioned preparing for the triennial and only having 25 minutes. So again, if I say teachers are superheroes without capes, special education teachers even more so are that.
Well, I think I got
You guys
so
do a lot.
I heard that because
Yeah, it's
I tell
true.
them this panel is like therapy for me because yeah, it's just going and going, and it's so good to hear and be amongst like-minded people. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Kelley, you're up next.
Hello. Hi, my name is Kelly Coleman, and I'm a parent of two amazing boys. Our older boy, Sean, is a typical kiddo who's 9 years old and is in 3rd grade at public school, LAUSD. And our younger son, Aaron, is 7 years old. He's in 1st grade and has a whole laundry list of special needs. There's a genetic something that we've done every test that science has available. And we have yet to discover what the genetic thing is. So it's whatever it is incredibly rare. And as part of that, he has so many diagnoses, including epilepsy, cerebral palsy, microcephaly, cortical vision impairment, G-tube, sensory processing issues. He's super handsome, he's super smiley. So he's got all kinds of things and behavior challenges and is incredibly delayed in relation to his peers. And, you know, as I'm listening to these other two panelists talking, I'm thinking, what am I doing on this panel? You know, these people with these incredible backgrounds, that's who you need to hear from. But I also think it's incredibly valuable to hear from parents like me who are very staunch advocates, very active, participate, advocate for these kids, and got thrown into this with absolutely no warning or background. I was am a writer and former cooking teacher. That's my background. And all of a sudden to get thrown into the world of special needs has been eye-opening every single day on every single level. It changes everything from how fast I get dressed in the mornings to the hours I spend a day, either battling the red tape of the school district. Our individual school is terrific for my son, and his school team has been amazing. And so I think I can really give a great sense to teachers of what is the parent experience when you're dealing with parents who are being thrown into this. And as teachers, I'm imagining many of you haven't yet had, and maybe even as you're going further into your careers, won't have much or any experience with kids with special needs. And kind of, where do you begin? How do you feel empowered rather than drowned by all of this? And how can you support parents to feel empowered when they are very seldom having the kinds of experience and background that our first two panelists did, and really being thrown into this? And how do you best support them and their kids? And I wish I had pictures of my kids because they're awesome and wonderful. And thank you guys for inviting me.
Amazing, Kelley. Thank you so much. And you absolutely should be here for all of those reasons you stated and so many others. So thank you again for being here. And next, let's hear from Nadia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nadia Ito. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I'm also a clinical supervisor at LA Speech and Language Therapy Center in Culver City. Our clinic is a family-centered practice. It's been in existence in LA for the past 42 years. So it's been a long time, and I'm so proud to be a part of the organization. I've been a speech pathologist for the past 16 years, so it's been a long time. And my clinical interest, so speech pathology, of course, serves, a spectrum of, different, areas. But my interests personally are, autism, early intervention, bilingualism, deaf and hard of hearing, AAC, augmentative alternative communication, and clinical supervision. So those are the things that interest me, and I put a lot of effort into it. I'm also Vice President of Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, Asian Pacific Islander Speech and Language Hearing Caucus, which is a nonprofit organization that supports families and clients of API background, as well as it also serves to support API communication sciences and disorders professionals, so which includes speech language pathologists and audiologists, and of course, those in the academia, right? So that's what I do. And I'm so happy to be here, and I had a lot of things I wanted to share. Probably it will come, as we get started. But just a little background about me. I'm half Japanese and half Sri Lankan. So Japanese is my first language, and I provide, therapy both in Japanese and English, and I also sign. So, I use sign language as a part of therapy. But I want to share with you quickly how I became a speech pathologist. So at that time, I was born and raised in Japan until I was 14. And my family moved to Sri Lanka, which is the country my father's from. And, in high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to be. I was interested in medicine, but I didn't know. And it just so happens that, it was one afternoon after, once the finals were over, and I typically don't take buses in Sri Lanka. You've seen in TV, like, buses are always crowded and people hanging. And so I don't typically, take buses in Sri Lanka, but I did one day, and it was empty. And there was this Caucasian lady sitting in a bus, and I happened to sit next to her. And I asked her, so what are you doing here in a bus, like in a public bus in Sri Lanka? And I told her, like, you don't see foreigners in buses unless you're my mother. My mother goes in buses everywhere. And she said she was a speech pathologist. And she was, sent from, anyway, she was a volunteer from England. And she was telling me how, fulfilling, her work was. And at that time, for the whole country of Sri Lanka, there was one speech language pathologist. And so I went home, I looked up and I thought, oh my gosh, this is what I need to do, And so, I live here now, but, I want to continue to, serve, my, community. And of course, I'm half Japanese, so I do work with a lot of, Japanese families and try to be supportive of, many Asian families, because culturally, we don't ask for services. Culturally, what's given, you accept and you say thank you. But what happens sometimes, some families are taken advantage of because, you don't share, you don't tell, the professionals, we don't question professionals, and so, advocacy, working with the families, empowering, families, that's one of the things I really, hold dear to my heart, as I practice. And looking back, my background has not only shaped me, but shaped me as a professional, today. And I think that's very important. And I would love to, share that, with you later. And, after 15 years, I'm still, passionate about what I do. So, but thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Just a reminder to mute. That was an amazing story, and I had no idea about how you were inspired from that one day on the bus in Sri Lanka to become a speech language pathologist. That's amazing. Thank you so much. We're going to hear from Lisa and then Jonathan.
It is very hard to follow after all these stories, but I will do my best. I'll just tell you what my story is. My name is Lisa Mosko. First and foremost, I'm the mother of 2 kids with disabilities. I like to say it that way because I really think that every time we say disability or think of an individual with a disability, we're focused so much on the dis that we forget about the ability. And I'd like to see society as a whole have a paradigm shift around this. I've even learned that the disabilities community has actually embraced the term disability because it was a term that has been used in a derogatory way, but in the same way that the LGBTQ community took back queer, well, the disabilities community is taking back disability, and we have to have a lot of pride in that. But my story as a parent is similar to Kelley. I came from a vastly different background. I was a creative professional, and then I had 2 kids who were diagnosed early on as being on the autism spectrum. And that totally turned my world upside down. And very quickly, I learned that I had to learn all sorts of ed code and try to, do my best to be my kid's own lawyer, and try to learn best practices, try to teach them at home. Was coached by a lot of therapists to follow through with therapies at home. Basically had to be the whole system for my child. And that is really hard for a parent who works full time. And it's a lot harder for the parent who may not speak English, may not have had access to a decent education, may not have the time, may not have the luxury of playing hooky from work to do all the work at home. So that led me to want to get more and more involved in advocacy. The second piece that made me want to get involved in advocacy is when I moved to LA. I started my journey with my kids in New York City public schools and moved here when they were 7 and 5 years old. And when I got here, I was really shocked to learn that the word inclusion wasn't really a thing yet. I didn't have the good fortune of meeting Ed. And back in New York, almost every public school has what we call collaborative team teaching classroom. A classroom where you have one special ed teacher co-teaching with one gen ed teacher, and they're really leading the work together. And the class is usually about 40% kids with disabilities and 60% typical kids. And it's not perfect. And sometimes you get a lot of the gen ed kids are actually kids who've just never been assessed. I've had a lot of teachers in New York complain about that to me. So it's actually pretty not as balanced as it should be. And they're still working their way through it. But the whole idea that every public school or almost every public school in New York City has this classroom speaks volumes. And then I landed in LAUSD and everyone's like, what? I don't know what that is. Your kid has autism? There's a really good non-public school for autism down the street. And my kids having been integrated for several years and really just their LRE was more of an inclusive setting. That's what their need was. I just was pretty blown away. So I found a school that had a strong social emotional curriculum and smaller class sizes, but put them in a gen ed program because that was the next best thing I could find for them. I became a member of the LAUSD Community Advisory Council for Special Education at LAUSD 4 years ago as part of my journey in advocacy. This is my 4th year there. Now I chair it. And Kelley is one of the members and has been a member with me for a couple of years now. And I also joined Speak Up a few years ago. At the time, Speak Up was really gaining speed as a real force for advocacy for parents in public schools. And I was excited about what they were doing and their mission to empower and educate parents to advocate for improved and high quality education at all public schools. But I didn't hear them talking about special ed. So I asked them, what are you guys going to do about special ed? And they said, you're going to do something about special ed. And they invited me on board as a community organizer with a focus on special education. And so now I have what we call the Special Ed Task Force, and Marini and Kelley and Noel are members. And we have a lot of really passionate, dedicated parents, and we meet weekly to really brainstorm on campaigns around how to improve special education in the district. The other thing that I've been doing at Speak Up is I formed a coalition of other organizations who are interested in amplifying the voice around special education. And the coalition is called DISCO, Disabilities Coalition. And we have been really pushing the needle hard and trying to expand the voice that really bubbles up from my special ed task force to other orgs in the district, like Special Needs Network or Families in Schools. and spreading that word so more and more organizations start repeating the same thing to the district to make it clear, like that you have to get with the program. That non-compliance during the pandemic or before the pandemic or after the pandemic doesn't work. You can't do that anymore. What's your plan for recuperation? What are you going to do about all the learning loss and loss of skills? And really start that conversation with them. And, you know, I'm not one to play the game of gotcha, but to really push and say, we want to be in real conversation with you. We want to be in a solutions-based conversation with you, but we're not going to stop until you say yes, or at least come up with some other solution. That's basically the work I do at Speak Up and with Disco. And I just want to say that I'm so excited about the work that Marini is doing, because I always had this kind of idea, maybe this isn't fair, maybe this is a sweeping generalization, but that the special educators are the best educators. Because when you can teach a kid who has exceptional needs, then you can probably teach any kind of kid. And I see special educators as the pioneers in a movement to diversify instruction, to help your gen ed peers understand that nobody's a normal learner, that even the typical kids who don't have IEPs all learn differently. And the special educators are the ones who've blazed that trail and really know how to differentiate. So no small undertaking, but I'm confident you guys will do it. And I'm excited you're here to hear from all of us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. Wow, we have such an amazing group with us, don't we? And I'm loving seeing our participation numbers rise. We're at 72 and climbing, so this is amazing. So finally, we're going to hear from Jonathan.
Hi there, can you guys all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi there, how's it going? My name is Jonathan Rodil. I'm an occupational therapist that currently works at the NAPA Center. And I'll just start off with how I sort of found my profession, occupational therapy. I found it in this really organic way where during my undergrad, I was taking a surfing class because I was a kinesiology major. And that's something you get credit for as a kinesiology major. But along the way, we had to come up with a project to increase our awareness about surfing culture. And that's when I found out more about the therapeutic implications of surfing. And doing some more digging and going down the rabbit hole, I found the Jimmy Miller Memorial Foundation, which is a surf therapy organization that was started from an occupational therapist that went to USC. But she started this program as a means to help at-risk youth populations as well as veterans who have PTSD. So I think just the fact that you could turn something that you really love to do into a means for therapy just really appealed to me. So I ended up becoming friends with this occupational therapist who started this program, sort of followed the path, went to USC, got my master's there in 2015 and my doctorate there in 2016. And I did my residency at this place called the UCED at CHLA, which stands for the USC Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. So really it was during that experience that I was exposed to different kids in addition to families that had a child with special need or varying degrees of ability, what have you. And all of these kids had a comorbid diagnosis of a mental health diagnosis as well as a developmental disability. So it was during that experience that I really fell in love with family-centered care. In addition to that, I was also in a fellowship during my residency called LEND, which stands for the Leadership and Excellence in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities. And it was during that time that I actually had the opportunity to work with a number of individuals from different professions, including speech therapy, physical therapy, developmental behavioral pediatrics, in addition to family support, which up until that point, I wasn't even aware was like a profession, but it was really cool because like many of the advocates that are on this panel, a lot of the professionals from family support were helping out families who were going through the same struggle in terms of access to care and helping them sort of navigate the way, which can be difficult for a lot of families who have a child with a special need or varying degrees of ability for the first time. So yeah, I specialized over there predominantly in pediatric mental health, as well as the floor time model, which is a model that we use in early intervention. And along the way, graduated from there and started working at the NAPA Center about 3 years and some change ago. Have had the opportunity to work with just some of the greatest kids and families you'll ever meet. But the NAPA Center is unique in that we provide something called an intensive model, where we'll see a kid every day for 3 weeks straight for a block of therapy. So the kid could be receiving anywhere from a 2-hour block to a 5-hour block of therapy. And we find that this intensive model just garners really, really great outcomes. And I think what I love about it the most is we get a lot of families, local, but also families that travel from all over the world and all over the country to come to our clinic. Of course, right now, because it's a pandemic, we're not really getting our international families, but we still get families from all over the country that are seeking out a certain level of care in terms of neurodevelopmental pediatrics. And that's something that we provide given the various skill sets on our team. But I think the thing that I love most about my job is the fact that I get a lot of families who, when they have a child, they have, these dreams and these hopes for what they, want their child's life to be like, and how they could push their child to be the best version of themselves. And I think that sometimes that hope can be a little bit lost. But what I enjoy about my job is being able to infuse that hope and helping paint a picture of, how this life can still be very much so special, and how your child still has, very much so a voice and their own unique being. And I'm going to help your child be the best version of themselves during this experience, whether that be with my intensive kiddos or my traditional kiddos. But yeah, my main specialties for anyone interested is pediatric mental health, early intervention, family-centered care. And I work with a pretty varied population at NAPA. Like my youngest one is about 11 months, and I work with kids, I think my eldest is about 22, with varying degrees of abilities, varying diagnoses, and some kids that lack a diagnosis. So it's always interesting to get these different presentations because it makes you that much better of a therapist and an adaptable therapist, which is a great skill to have. But yeah, thank you, Marini, for having me. And yeah, I'm just in awe in terms of all the skill sets that each one of the individuals on this panel provides. Because we say in therapy, it really does take a village. So I think that having all these varied skill sets and experiences on this panel is only going to be helpful for anybody who's interested in pursuing a career in this wonderful and amazing field.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm just like oozing with excitement and awe and admiration for everyone on the panel. Really quickly, before we jump in, I just wanted to share my connection to special education. A lot of you who've taken my classes know I teach Child Development 44, which is early intervention for children with special needs, and Child Development 45, which is programs for children with special needs. I've been teaching both for about 4 years at West LA College. And those classes I teach with so much passion, not only because I really enjoy teaching and teaching pre-service teachers, but because, I have a personal connection, which is one of the reasons why I'm connected to so many folks on this panel, because my 7-year-old Coco, he is an amazing little guy who, whenever you meet him, you just fall in love with him. He was born with a rare genetic X-linked mutation called IQ-SEC2. And so like many of the other folks on the panel, kind of when you become a parent of an exceptional child, you are overwhelmed, you are, looking for any resource that you can. It can be lonely, it can be gut-wrenching, it can be so amazing and fulfilling and rewarding too. I feel like I found an advocacy muscle that I never knew that I had. And when you have this idea of a mama bear, it's like, it's that on 20 when you are a parent advocating for your child with special needs. And so I'm connected to a lot of people on this panel because of Coco. Like Jonathan was Coco's OT. Nadia did speech therapy for both of my children. Coco and Jabril, Noel's son, were in the same preschool program at NAPA Center. Kelley and we kind of met through Facebook support groups. And when I met her at NAPA, I was like fanning out, like, I can't believe I met you in person, because she is such an encyclopedia of information and she's so helpful with all things special education. And Lisa, her Speak Up group has just been an amazing force. Honestly, it's really a force. It's been this amazing conduit for really advocating and pushing the boundaries, because I will have to say that just because there are special education laws that are in writing that have been imprinted in our legal system for decades, it does not mean that the rights of our children are being advocated for and are being supported and the letter of the law is being followed by educational institutions. And I will say that, and I will stand by that, because year after year, I have to fight for basic rights for my child to get what he needs to be safe in a classroom setting. And so I just want to say again, I don't know if all of you here realize just the amazing group of people that are here on this panel. And so we're going to dive into questions, because now I'm sure you want to know specific information. We have a few questions that we're going to start with, and then we're going to open it up for all of you to ask questions. So hopefully, as everyone was speaking, you were generating some questions that you might have. So, and we can't wait to hear them. So the first question that I'm going to ask, and this is for anyone on the panel to answer: how can general education teachers advocate for our students with special needs? And this is an important question because many of you want to go specifically into special education, right? A lot of my students are passionate about that, but some of you maybe aren't going into that specialty. You might want to be a gen ed teacher. However, there is a high likelihood that you will be supporting children with diverse needs in your classroom, particularly students with special needs, whether they are diagnosed or not. And so we want to ensure that this next, in honor of Teacher Appreciation Week, and for every day beyond this, we want to make sure that all of our children are going to be supported with teachers who are prepared to provide them and to advocate for them. So that's one reason why we think it's really, really important that gen ed teachers are prepared, because it's a lot, it's difficult, it's challenging, right? And you're like, I didn't sign up for this. I don't know how to support these children. And so we want to try to bridge that gap and make sure that gen ed teachers are able to advocate to the best of their ability for children with special needs. So anyone want to try to tackle that question?
I can jump in to get us started.
Sure.
Of the many ways you can do that, the parents are coming in as the expert on the child. The parents are also coming in, from the very beginning, we're making boxing metaphors, and that is so accurate. The parents have been fighting and fighting and fighting. I literally fight for my child to be able to eat at school. That is a fight that I'm in the middle of and waiting on signatures for this week. Those are the kind of things that I'm fighting for, is for my child's basic right to eat at school. So the parents are exhausted, they're drained, they're even the best, most amazing of parents feel like their heads are going to explode most of the times. So a way that you can help yourself and really, really help these kids is to bring those parents in close, ask them questions. And if you are struggling with figuring out how to decode their kid, they probably can help you find the answer if they don't know the answer already. Parents are so excited to work with teachers who say, I want to teach your kid and I want your kid to do great in my class. Let's work together to figure out how to make that happen, because if you've got tons of great ideas or if you have zero ideas, that parent will bend over backwards to make you successful because they know you will make their child successful.
Thank you so much, Kelley. That's a really, really important point about the role of the parents. And that cannot be undersold. The role of the parents is so, so important. Is there anyone else? Nadia.
I can share a little bit with you from my experience. I forgot to mention this, but I've also worked in a school before for maybe 4.5 years at a charter school through our clinic. And I would say the keyword is collaboration, and I was so fortunate to be able to work with, many gen ed teachers who reached out to me, collaborating with me, and reaching out to me so that, I can, give the tips, not only the tips that's on the IEP, not the accommodations, sit in the, at the front of the, the classroom, of course, those things are, important, but, when the teachers came to me and, asked me specifically, okay, this student is, doing this and this, how can I help? These specific questions were very valuable because I was able to cater to, their needs. And I also want to add to, what Kelley said, collaborating with the families and parents is so important, because parents are the expert of the, of the students and the, the children. So, I'm fortunate because I get to work in a family-centered practice. I'm always working with the families and always collaborating with them as a team. And sometimes it may not be an easy thing to do when you work in a school. I know I've been there, so I understand, sometimes it may be a difficult thing to do, but from my experience, collaboration, I would think is one of the keys.
Thank you so much. Ed.
You calling me?
Yes, I did.
I will say that I know a lot of amazing general ed teachers who were even in the midst of like on the surface, a big push for inclusion, were still being left out of the process and were telling me, oh, it would have been nice if I would have been brought into that. And I think that's what happens sometimes in these public school situations. It really takes a visionary leadership because it gets so compartmentalized that everyone's gears are grinding to a halt, and it's like easy to get pitted. It feels like you're getting pitted against someone else, even though. So I don't have any I don't know what the exact solution is because we're so in the middle of that very thing right now. But I just see the potential. I think if it's not happening, there's something getting in the way. There's people who are doing their job and are not doing it correctly, because in the heart of almost every person that I talk to, aside from like a few kind of unique situations, they're like, we want to be all in on this, like make this easy, show us the way. And I just find it so unfortunate that this is something that, like, I'm 46 right now. I can see myself, I want to have a much larger impact going forward because I don't want to see this war anymore. There's people who will run through a wall for children. If you get into special education as an educator or even general ed, but oftentimes as educators in the public school, we're not talked to in the way that will get us to run. They're like, instead, they don't touch the heart. They're so there's something called CYA, cover your mentality. And when it gets so much about people worried about covering for themselves, it's like we forget, because there's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law as well. And the spirit of the law, which is the only thing we are here to do, is to empower these children to take over the world, because that's what they're going to do. So I wish and I hope that my voice moving forward even more, I write columns, because my stuff falls on deaf ears. I've been writing a column for 10 years. Very rarely does any of it, I bring it to people's attention, but because it doesn't fit into the matrix that they're looking at. For me, it's so much about the spirit of the law too. I talk to all of my parents. I talk to all of my staff. I don't care where the answers come from. If you're really in it to win it, for what this is all about, I'll take the answers however they come, because it makes my job so much easier. It's insane. So anyway, that's my, I guess that's more than 2 cents, but that's what I have to share about that.
Thank you. No, that was very powerful, Ed. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think just going back to Nadia's point about collaboration, that's super important. I think, you know, our responsibility is, like, as OTs, we focus on the underlying skills that manifest into function, right? And I think that the best teachers that I've worked with, they were able to paint a picture of what was stopping their student from best accessing their curriculum. And as OTs, that's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at, you know, in terms of the underlying skills, when it comes to like this child, say like sensory processing or their fine motor skills, or their ability to sequence activities together, or their ability to develop the ideation and then execute a motor plan, things that are all within the context of a child being able to successfully access their curriculum, the better the picture can be painted for me, just because I do work like in an outpatient clinic. The better it is in terms of me being able to provide helpful insights or strategies, learning strategies that are helpful based off of the work that I might have done with the student. But with that said, I've also worked at really great places where, like in the Department of Mental Health, like I could do those visits at the school, see them in an outpatient clinic, and then see the child at home, and it just paints a totally different dynamic, you know, based off the setting. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just having, you know, that open communication with any type of provider you're working with. Just because for me, I could give very specific insight in regards to how this child best learns based off of my experiences. And in the same token, I could also learn something really valuable from the teacher in terms of a way that they might be approaching the child in terms of teaching them, which I will then reinforce in my session for continuity.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah, I would also just say that, back to what I was saying earlier, that special education teachers, I would just say start organizing now. I come at things through an organizing lens. How do we organize for collective power? How do we organize to amplify our voice? You have an opportunity with the teachers union for organizing. Now, what I've seen happening at the teachers union is that they have a special ed committee, but that committee's voice isn't very strong right now. There is a prominent teacher at the LAUSD teachers union, the UTLA, at UTLA, Gloria Martinez, who has been beating the drum for, you know, more funding for IDEA, you know, more federal funding. And that's really positive, but I don't see enough of a voice within the union for special educators and advocating for special needs kids. And I would love to see special educators build momentum within that sort of framework, if you will, because right now it's very binary. It's like gen ed, special ed, and special ed is a very small minority. Recently, UTLA signed a side letter agreement with LAUSD that was about the return to school for kids with special needs. And it just stated flatly, all students must wear masks. Well, obviously, right? Yes, I can understand why they would write that. Public health concern, I'm a strict mask wearer. But at the same time, the CDE has made it really clear that if a child has special needs that really prevent that child from wearing a mask, then that child still needs to be offered an in-person instruction or service somehow. So where were the special ed teachers in the room saying, wait a second, all kids must wear masks, and those who cannot reasonably tolerate a mask must be offered accommodations X, Y, and Z, and must be given supports and do you know what I mean? But if you just say flatly, all kids can't wear all kids have to wear masks, then you have a whole section of the population that's being left out, and actually it's not compliant with the CDE. So start now, start organizing now, start influencing your gen ed peers now to really push open, you know, really expand that pie.
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa. That's such a great point about kind of that unawareness and this idea that, those blanket statements that are not addressing the needs of our children who are exceptional. Because my son, he wouldn't be able to wear a mask because he needs oxygen. He has lung disease. So would that be a consideration, right? Something else that I wanted to point out on a little bit more practical level. So those of us, faculty, professors, or educators who are in higher ed who are teaching pre-service teachers, the other thing that I want to just point out is that in order for gen ed teachers to feel like they can advocate for children with special needs, they just need to be more familiar with what that looks like. It needs to be incorporated in their coursework. And so, obviously I teach 2 classes that specialize in special education, but we do include in our course crossover so that we explain, what every gen ed teacher should know about special education, for example, like the basics, like what are the categories under IDEA, what's the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan. My students in my CD45 class right now just submitted an IFSP, a sample IFSP. So it's really important, but in our other child development classes, like our curriculum classes, child development 7 and 8, we want to start embedding how do you provide accommodations and modifications rather than just a regular lesson plan. A lesson plan needs to differentiate for the children in your classroom. So trying to get our child development discipline committee to try to start embedding, making sure that in those lesson plans, for example, that our children are practicing, that they are prepared. How do you make sure that your lesson is addressing the needs of all learners in your classroom? And so preparing our students now so that when they go into, classrooms, that they're going to be able to uphold the law, the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, but also to make sure that, if I'm sending my child into your classroom, then I can rest assured that my child is not going to be isolated. My child is going to be included. All right, we're going to move on to the next question. So what tip or advice can you give someone who's looking to work in the special education field? Anyone want to take that? Jonathan.
I know it's hard with COVID right now, but I mean, just volunteering, right? I think being able to volunteer is just super, super important because you get to see like what the day-to-day looks like. If you're at like a really great site, at our site, like the therapist will sort of teach what our clinical reasoning process is like with the volunteers, just so that way they get a better understanding of the intentionality behind like each move that we're doing in therapy. But I think it's just always important to see like what it looks like. Even if like this is what you want to go into, it's always good just to be able to even like confirm that too. And along the way, you may find yourself a mentor. You might find somebody else who's on a similar journey that could, hold you accountable, but also sort of navigate that road with you. I can't tell you how many volunteers have sort of come into NAPA trying to figure out like what they want to go into. They end up finding OT or PT or speech, and how many have like followed through with, getting into grad school and seeking out that profession. And some of them are actually even like working professionally now. So I can't stress it enough, like whenever you can, try and volunteer, because it is like the best way to learn and see, in this really great field, which role best fits the talents that you have, in terms of what you can offer in terms of your own value.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Anyone else? Noelle.
Sorry. My advice for someone looking to work in special education is don't believe everything you read. So as a special education teacher or a general education teacher, one of the first things you're going to want to do is jump into the student's IEP and look at old psych reports and evaluations. And all of that is really, really important clinical information about where a student is. But you want to maintain just like an optimism and like ask, the universe what is possible for each student. Kind of putting them in a box of a diagnosis or of their present levels from last year is not going to be helpful for the student or the parent or for yourself. So I would just encourage you as you go into special education to think of each child as exactly who they are, an individual, have high expectations for what they can achieve, and then be super creative on how you're going to help them get there. I just had an IEP meeting last week, and we have like this most incredible new teacher. And just when he was speaking about my son's goals, like I seriously can't stand listening to goals. I almost like say, just fast forward to what's the FAPE, what's the offer? But even listening to him talk about the goals and then scaffolding how he's going to get my son to be writing 2 sentences by next year, it like seriously brought tears to my eyes because he had like thought about it so well and really like crafted this whole plan of how he was going to get my son to write 2 sentences by next year. And I believed him, and, you know, and that's as a parent, it sucks to say, you were a little shocked, but it was like the most beautiful thing. And then also like never forget why you're there, because if you're entering into this work, it's because you have a heart and passion. It's very easy in teaching period just to get kind of run down with bureaucracy and the extremely difficult caseload, but kind of try to remember always like why you're there and find ways to bring hope to kiddos and to their families and to the school. And then finally, always look for ways of inclusion. You know, there's this meme out there that says, if you want to know how to treat a person with disabilities, watch their siblings. And there's nothing more accurate than that. You know, don't put them in that box. Stay away from that box and just look at them as individuals and care for them and do the very best work that you can. And when you get tired, and you will, look for something to do for 1 year so that you can regroup and come back in with the same passion and love that you had when you started that first year.
I love that advice, especially the siblings. So powerful and so true. Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, I love what you just said as well. It's been my lifesaver, which is, I call it 4th grade book reports. When I see someone who's just reading a report because they want to look like they put their thing together, like I just feel like I'm listening to a bad book report and it often puts people on edge, and they don't even necessarily understand it, and then they feel like they got to look like they understand it. For me, the IEP is a story. It's a communication. It's like I've seen parents literally pick off everyone else in the room, and then for some reason ask me, just what do you think about, like they're hitting everyone else. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? And they get to me and they're like, what do you think about everyone else here is doing? I'm getting ready to get shot off the fence, but I really believe it's just because I'm transparent. I truly love the students. I get to know them. I put it above everything else. And like my bottom line is if they don't want me to do it that way, then they can feel free to ask me to leave. A lot of the times my goal is to not tear myself apart and run out of the situation, because they've run the last 3 teachers out of my room from all the stress. So I have to be really loving and kind with myself. But what you just said, Noel, was music to my ears. I've had so much success. I always include, I would say, along with the IEP, a lot of times you got to throw away any stories that make the parents into these scary people or a problem or something like that. It's just like, you got to know, like what these parents are saying here, that they've been in it. Like a lot of people have treated it like a war. They're trying like everyone's so scared. It's like, so I just do my best to come in with an open heart. And like, if I don't know, I don't know. Sometimes I've gone to meetings where I've said almost nothing. And at the end, the advocate or it's the lawyer even will say, this is the best, that was the best meeting we ever had. They're so lucky to have you. And I'm like, what did I even say? But I think sometimes it's what I don't say. Like I don't cover my, behind or whatever. So anyway.
Man, snaps. So this next question is also geared towards parents, and I think it hopefully I'm saying the name right, Rajaswari. But this is a question that comes up a lot with my students, especially my students who work with families.
Please begin scanning.
Make sure you're muted. So the question is, how do you suggest to parents that their child might benefit from an evaluation or an assessment? So you're working with a student, with a child, and maybe you suspect that there's a delay or you suspect a diagnosis. How do you broach that subject with the parents? Anyone want to take that one? Jonathan.
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to always understand, like, first and foremost, like, culture, right? And the fact that, you know, disability is conceptualized differently in every culture, and you want to be respectful of that. Because the biggest thing is, you know, you want to be able to help, you know, this child or student be the best version of themselves, but you also don't want to say something that is immediately met with perhaps like refusal because of, you know, maybe cultural differences or stigma, what have you. So it's always important to be mindful and respectful of how the family feels about that, right? I think the way that I've approached that in the past is just using something more universal. And I think the big universal thing that I use is the fact that, like, the assessments that I do as an OT can be done on anyone in order to get a better understanding of where your child is testing, whether that be gross motor function or social emotional skills or fine motor skills, bilateral integration, which is the ability to coordinate both sides of the body, different underlying domains, right? But all things that would be helpful for any parent to find out more about their child. Because, you know, if they're doing really great and they're up to speed in terms of all the underlying skills, then it only confirms that for the parent. But, you know, if there is an underlying area of challenge, you could sort of reflect, you know, the standardized testing as it pertains to this domain. And you could sort of show how a provision of services may be helpful towards getting that child to where they need to be. So I think in my experiences, framing it from that standpoint in terms of, hey, you know, an assessment may be helpful to get a better understanding of, you know, where your child is testing right now. And I think that parents respond really well when that's the case. And I've also worked with some parents before where, you know, if I do assess their child, sometimes they may receive like a provisional diagnosis, which will help them better access certain services. And that's important for a lot of families too, especially like our early intervention kiddos, where like these services, you know, are made for you know, kids that are under the age of 3, and you should be able to access it while you can, because you know, a lot of the kids that I work with just, you know, present more so with a global developmental delay, don't have a diagnosis, but being able to access this service is tremendously helpful in terms of getting the child to scaffold some of their development. So I think that more so framing it towards like a provision of services or something universal in terms of, hey, like, can I assess where your child is testing at for these skills tends to be very helpful, at least in my experiences.
That's amazing, Lisa. And then we'll open it up. We have about 15 minutes left. So after Lisa responds, I'll open it up to the participants to see if we can maybe take one more question before our panelists give their final thoughts. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real tricky one because if the parent isn't ready to hear it, you know, it's hard. I think when possible, see if the parent brings it up first. You know, obviously, you can't just bring it on them. But, you know, I've given a lot of trainings to parents around their rights, IEP trainings, and I always start with a whole slideshow of very celebrated individuals who have a disability. So, you know, there's Gavin Newsom has dyslexia. Everyone's new favorite, Amanda Gorman, such an incredible poet, has auditory processing disorder and had speech articulation issues, believe it or not, even though her words just danced and flowed. The list could go on, but it's just really important to know that, in the words of another fellow advocate of mine, who runs a really great support group, if any of you need a really great support group in Spanish, it's called Un Paso Más. She always says, diagnosis is not prognosis. You know, it is not the end all be all. And, you know, it's just really important to also stress that everybody has differences. I wear contact lenses. I always tell my kids this. You know, they're like, oh, I don't want to do my therapy, or I don't want to be different. I wear contact lenses. I'm so lucky. I live in a world that offers me contact lenses, because without them, I'd be staggering around, kind of making it through, but I wouldn't be thriving. Aren't you lucky you're being offered extra support to be your best self? So that's kind of how I frame it.
That's awesome. I love that metaphor with the contact lenses. As a fellow contact lens wearer who would be beyond legally blind, that's a great way to kind of, destigmatize in a way the idea that these are just additional supports to help you to be your best self. I love that. I'm going to open it up. We have time for maybe one more, and panelists, just start thinking about your 1 to 2 minute final thoughts that you're going to share. Would anyone like to? I've been looking at the chat. I think we covered some of them. Or folks, thank you, panelists. I know some of you have already been answering these questions in the chat. It's been amazing. Are there any other questions from the participants? Feel free to put it in the chat now, or you can unmute. I may have missed something. I don't know, Bobby, if you saw anything in the chat that I may have missed. This is your opportunity now. Anyone in the group?
Hi, Professor Smith.
Hi.
I have a question for one of the panelists.
Sure.
Why would you have to fight for your son to eat lunch at his school? Can you share? I'm not aware of because I hear a lot that parents who have children with disabilities that they have to get an attorney or advocate. And I just wanted to get a little insight on why. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Nicole.
That's a great question. Since my kid is the one with the lunch issues, I will jump in and say how it pertains to him, but also bring it out to a wider population. Because of my son's feeding tube and the way that the feeding tube needs to be operated, he's 100% fed by the feeding tube. And because of the school's policies, they say that they can't feed him the way that all of his doctors say he needs to be fed. And we were actually in an IEP meeting where no offer of any sort was made for him to be fed by an adult, which is a requirement for his remaining alive. And I said, what about feeding our son? And they actually said, this is a quote, "That's not part of our offer." And so those are the sorts of things that we're coming up against. It's more specific for our son because most kids don't have feeding tubes. So that's good news. But that is an example of the sort of battles that special needs parents are fighting. Children who are completely nonverbal but aren't offered speech therapy, for example. Children who are a safety issue or a danger to themselves and others, and who can't access the education, who can't ambulate from point A to point B, and things like this, who are not offered a one-to-one aid within the classroom. Parents are needing to make a list of the supports that their child needs in order to access their education. That's a phrase that you'll hear a lot, is can the student access the education? And the law is that students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. Most of those terms are very easy to define. The word appropriate is the one where we really get into it, and our lawyers get into it, and our advocates get into it. I am in a lawsuit situation with the school district at least once every year. As a parent and as a taxpayer, that is infuriating because it's the exact same fights every single year. As teachers, you can really be thinking about and holding hands with parents and administration on what is appropriate for this child. The law isn't that it has to be the best and all the bells and whistles and everything we could possibly give that child. The law is what is appropriate. How can this child be afforded the same equity of opportunity to learn and access the education as other students? And I'm sure Lisa Mosko has something to say about that.
Go for it, Lisa.
I just want to add on. It's true that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act just says free and appropriate public education and what's appropriate, and that's very subjective. And parents are duking it out every day of the week in this district or in all districts. However, there was a Supreme Court case a few years ago that said that it's not just what is enough. You know, it's not that an IEP or free and appropriate public education should be adequate for a child to remain at grade level. It should be for that child to be able to reach their maximum potential. So when you're advocating for what's appropriate, whether you're a parent or a teacher or provider sitting at that table, remember you need to be advocating not just for the bare minimum, but for the stars in terms of what's appropriate. That there's precedence for that in the United States Supreme Court.
Thank you so much. And I just put in the chat, someone in Speak Up, Lisa, I don't remember who wrote it in one of our threads. They said the law should be the floor, not the ceiling. So the floor is like the bare minimum that says legally you are bound to do this. It should not be, oh, well, we're following the law and that's all we have. That's the maximum that you're going to get. That's the bare minimum is what the law says. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, participants. This has been absolutely amazing. Before we run out of time, I just wanted to give each one of our panelists, and we're going to just go in reverse order from the way that you introduced yourselves. So Jonathan, Lisa, Nadia, Kelley, Edward, and then Noel, if you just want to leave us with final thoughts, 1 to 2 minutes, anything that you want to leave our participants with, words of wisdom, advice, a resource, anything that you think will kind of sum up your thoughts for today. All right, we'll start with Jonathan.
Yeah, I would say for anybody that is curious or interested in learning more about the field, I think it's always great to just surround yourself with other like-minded and passionate individuals, especially within this field where there's a lot of navigation for all parties involved, whether that be the families or the therapists, because we're always trying to find, what are the various routes to help this child be the best version of themselves, right? So I think that just aligning yourself with other individuals who are like-minded in your passion is tremendously helpful, especially if you want to pursue a career in this really, really amazing field. Yeah, I'm here to, answer any questions that any of you may have regarding the OT or any questions that you guys might have specifically about NAPA, because we do a lot of unique specialized intervention there in terms of neurodevelopmental pediatrics. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to let me know.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Lisa?
Yeah, Jonathan, I do have to offline with you because my daughter has incredible anxiety, fell in love with surfing, and then became anxious about the ocean and now won't surf. So I'm wondering how to get around that one.
We'll go surfing for sure.
Just, at Speak Up, we have this analogy of the three-legged stool supporting the child. Imagine a stool, right? And the child is sitting on top of the stool, and the stool is LAUSD, or any school district, really. And one leg is the administrators, the next leg is the teachers, and the third leg is the parents. If you're missing any one of these three legs, the child falls down. So in your work, just keep on collaborating with the parents, keep on collaborating with fellow teachers, keep on collaborating with administrators, and just remind them like the kid needs all of us to work together for it to really happen for that kid. That's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
I love that. Any visual analogy? Go ahead, Lisa. I'm sorry.
Sorry, one more thing. If you're interested in joining our special ed task force, we are open to teachers, parents, students, anybody who has a vested interest, admin in students with disabilities and lifting them up. So I invite anyone to contact me if you're interested. Thanks.
Awesome. Do you want to put some contact info in the chat maybe? It's up to you. Thank you. Nadia.
All right. I'm going to share with you what my mentor shared with me when I was a senior in college. That was the first time I attended the Asian Pacific Islanders Speech and Language Hearing Caucus meeting. And I happened to be at the meeting by accident. And she was my professor and she's my mentor. And she said, because of your background and your life experience, there will be people who can benefit from your services. And it is so, so true, So remember that you're unique and what your background, your experience can help somebody in some way.
That's beautiful, Nadia. that speaks to the question that Lindsay had asked in the chat. And thank you, panelists. So many folks answered. Lindsay had asked, can someone with a learning disability be an educator? And so you have something very unique. You have a unique perspective that you can offer the children and the students that you teach. So that's beautiful. Thank you. And then can we hear from Kelley?
Hello. There's so many thoughts we all have. Whether you're a gen ed teacher, whether you're a special ed teacher, whether you bounce back and forth in between, children with diverse needs are generally the ones that take the hardest work, the most creativity, the most of your energy, the most of your resources, the most of your time, the most of everything. They will exhaust you, they will drain you, they will push you to your limits, and they are the ones that you will tell your grandkids about. I guarantee the therapist at the NAPA Center, who, I'm ready to cry here, who got my son walking when we didn't know if he ever would, she's going to tell her grandkids about him. These kids are the ones that not only are they worth fighting for, but they are the ones that you will be thinking about when you go to bed at night. And even on those days that are so hard and that feel like it's going to be impossible to go back in there and to do this again tomorrow, you will know with every single bit of your heart that you are making the biggest difference. And I say this as a mom of a typical kid and a kid with severe special needs. You'll remember both of my kids because they're great. But the one with special needs is going to be the one that you're going to say, and this is why I did this. So keep that in mind on those hard days.
Thank you, thank you. Ed, and then Noel.
I'd say that at some point in my life, it occurred to me that every human being is whole, and that this body and this mind is sort of how we relate with the world. So understanding that, it's so easy for me to work with whoever's in front of me. It's like, I would just tell you one quick story, which was when I was in college, I was looking at a bird and I was thinking, if I say to that bird, hey, bird, come over here and have, I'm not speaking that bird's language. It's not going to respond to me. It's not because it's being a bad bird. It's because I'm not speaking the bird's language. And that somehow, that one little moment just made me realize, like, I got to learn to speak the language of these other people who they're not, there's a neurodiversity. There's a lot of different ways of receiving information, and none is better than the other. Every human being is whole. That to me is the salvation of education, is just to recognize that, like, because there's so many filters about, is he testing here? Is he there? Is there? And there's money making to be, but it's like the bottom line is, as human beings, if we see that everyone's whole, because I guarantee that each one of my students, whether they're verbal, not too verbal, non-verbal, they have one thing that every one of us, if we could learn from that person, that one thing, we would all be better off. Like, they all bring something that I'm like, I wish I was more like that kid in that, or this person in this way. And that, to me, is inclusion, because that's not a joke. It's not a novelty. It's real. If we would be more like the gifts that each one of these people be, we're better off. So that's why I love it. And I'm so glad. I feel recharged just coming to this panel, and I'm ready for my 8 a.m. meeting tomorrow. So thank you all.
I love it. Thank you. I love your passion. Your students are very lucky to have you.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate that.
And Noelle, bring us home.
Yeah. You know, this is super practical. I love what everyone else had to say, and I don't have anything really inspiring to say, but I do want you to know that there's a huge shortage of special education teachers in California and actually across the nation. If you're interested in becoming a special education teacher, start researching it now. A lot of schools, even LAUSD has it embedded into their district, but many colleges have a program called an intern teaching credential, where after you have your bachelor's degree and you're ready to start working towards your teaching credential in special education, you get a position at a school as a as a new special education teacher, you can get paid a salary while doing your program. And there's also a lot of other incentives for districts that are really need teachers really badly. They'll have signing bonuses and stipends for education as well. So if this is something that you're truly passionate about and just like kind of like, oh, that's a lot of money and I don't really know how long it will take me to, to get there, start looking into it now, because we need people who are passionate and who are going to keep that creativity coming to help serve our students. So there's a lot of programs out there. I hope that you tap into them, and I can't wait to see you guys in the classroom.
Marini, you're muted. I just wanted. I know you were going on. Yeah. I was going to tell you though.
Thank you, Noel. We do need more SPED teachers.
I was watching the chat, but all your panelists have been really good about responding to people in the chat. So there wasn't really any questions that weren't addressed.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, we appreciate you for your questions and for your participation and your enthusiasm. I think the future of our next generation of teachers and students looks very bright based on what we're seeing here. So thank you. Thank you. I think some folks have asked for contact information for some of the panelists. If you can just double check the chat, but we thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.